It wasn't the world that had rejected me. It was my own thoughts. My name is Rehan Malik, and if you'd met me 10 years ago, you'd have found a 34-year-old man dragging his feet through life. I wasn't born with wealth, nor did I have access to special privileges. My father died when I was in 6th grade, and my mother, a school janitor, raised me with everything she had. But we both knew love didn't pay the bills. We lived in a small, crumbling 2-room house on the outskirts of a forgotten town. Dust clung to the walls like a shadow that never left, and hope, that was even rarer. From an early age, I knew I was different. I wanted more. I dreamed of becoming a writer, a speaker, a man who could inspire thousands. But dreaming was the easy part. Life never asked me what I wanted. It only showed me what I couldn't have. I'd wake up at 6 a.m., not out of purpose but habit. I'd sweep floors at the local factory, a job I'd been doing for nearly 6 years. The pay was just enough to buy medicine for my mother and stale bread for dinner. I had no friends left. Most of them had either moved to cities or stopped talking to me because I talked too much about dreams. There was a time when I applied to over 60 jobs. Sales, marketing, writing, editing, office assistant, anything. Every rejection was like a hammer striking my will. We're looking for someone with more experience. You don't fit our culture. You didn't clear the aptitude test. The last one simply said, "We don't think you belong here." And honestly, maybe they were right. Maybe I didn't belong anywhere. It was the coldest night of December. My mother had a fever and we didn't have enough money for the full prescription. I sat by her bedside holding her fragile hand. She looked at me with a tired smile as if apologizing for being a burden. That night I broke. I walked out into the darkness, sat on a broken bench near the railway tracks and cried like a child. Not because of pain, but because of powerlessness. That's when my childhood friend Sharik found me. He hadn't seen me in months. I told him everything. He listened silently, and then he said a sentence that would change my life. "Rehan, your real problem isn't money. It's your mindset." I laughed, a dry, sarcastic laugh. "What does that even mean?" He leaned forward and said, "You've built a wall inside your mind. Until you break that, nothing on the outside will change." That night, I couldn't sleep. His words haunted me. The next morning, I looked in the mirror and asked myself, what if Sharik is right? What if all these years I've been blaming my circumstances, but the real prison was in my head? So I wrote a question on a sticky note and pasted it on my wall. What do successful people think that I don't? That single question became the seed of my transformation. I didn't have money, but I had access to a free public library. Every evening after work, I spent 2 hours reading biographies, success stories, psychology. From Abdul Sattar Edi to Steve Jobs, from Nelson Mandela to Dr. Abdul Kalam, I studied how they thought. I noticed one thing they all had in common. They believed change was possible, first in their mind, then in their life. I started journaling. Every failure I had, I wrote what I learned from it. I stopped saying, "Why me?" and started asking, "What now?" I watched TED Talks on YouTube, using free Wi-Fi outside cafes. I began writing again, small blogs, short poems, even quotes. No one read them. But for the first time in my life, I was showing up for myself. One day I read a quote by James Allen. "You are today where your thoughts have brought you. You will be tomorrow where your thoughts take you." I wrote it in bold letters and stuck it above my mirror. I looked at it every day. I let it sink into my bones, and slowly something inside me shifted. One day, while writing at the library, a thought came to me. What if I shared my journey, my raw, broken, honest journey, with the world? Not as a success story, but as a becoming story. I didn't know how, I didn't know where to begin, but I knew one thing. If I was going to change my life, I had to change my mind first, and so began the real journey. Not just to success, but to freedom from self-doubt, victimhood, and fear. You can't start the next chapter of your life if you keep rereading the last one. The day I decided to take control of my mindset was not the day my life changed, but it was the day I started walking toward change. That's the thing about mindset. It doesn't give you instant results, but it shifts your direction. For the next few weeks, I kept doing my job at the factory, but my evenings were no longer about just passing time. They were about building myself. One evening, I came across a free online platform that allowed users to post their articles. I hesitated. I had written dozens of motivational reflections in my journal, but the idea of sharing them with the world terrified me. What if people laugh at me? What if I make a mistake? What if no one even reads it? And then I asked myself a new question. What if one person reads it and feels hope? That night, I published my first blog titled, "The Day I Found My Enemy in the Mirror." The next morning, I had 6 views. 3 were probably mine, but it didn't matter. I had started. But the world doesn't cheer you the moment you decide to rise. In fact, it often pulls harder to keep you down. At the factory, I was called Motivational Baba. They mocked my journals, laughed at my blog, and said, "Rayhan thinks he's a writer now." Even my mother, who loved me dearly, said in her soft, tired voice, "Beta, I know you want to change your life, but don't forget the real world. Dreaming doesn't pay bills." It hurt deeply. But then I realized it's not their fault. They were speaking from their own fears, not from my future. So I stopped trying to explain myself. I made peace with being misunderstood. One night, while browsing YouTube on the public Wi-Fi outside a burger shop, I stumbled upon a speech by a man named Les Brown. He said, "You have greatness within you." It felt as if he was talking to me. That night I cried, but not out of pain. It was a release. I had always waited for someone to tell me that I was enough, that I wasn't stupid or small or too late, and finally a stranger's voice reached a place that no one else had ever touched. That night I made a decision. I'm not just going to survive. I'm going to serve. I'm going to lead. I'm going to live. I gave myself a simple challenge. Write every day. Post every week, learn every month. I borrowed a second-hand laptop from a neighbor by offering free cleaning work for 2 weeks. I created a simple blog. I joined writing groups. I submitted articles to websites even if they didn't pay me. Some rejected me, most ignored me, but one site replied, "We like your writing. Could you write a guest post on overcoming fear?" I smiled for hours. 6 months into my journey, I received an email from a small self-development podcast. The host had read one of my blog posts and wanted me to join as a guest speaker. I almost didn't go. I kept thinking, who am I to speak about mindset? But then I remembered, you don't have to be perfect to help others. You just have to be honest. I went. My voice trembled. My hands sweated, but I spoke the truth about pain, struggle, mindset, and hope. When the episode aired, I received my first ever message from a listener. "Thank you. Your words stopped me from giving up today." I couldn't believe it. Me, helping someone I've never met? I wasn't rich. I still worked the factory job. But inside me, something had shifted. I no longer saw myself as a victim of life. I saw myself as a student of it. I no longer waited for motivation. I created it through my actions, and slowly people around me began to notice. Not because I was preaching to them, but because I was changing, quietly, consistently. Sharik visited again and said, "You're not the same Rayhan I saw crying near the tracks." I smiled and replied, "That Rayhan was the seed. This one is still growing." One day, I visited a government school to donate a few used books. A teacher recognized me from the podcast and asked if I could speak to the students. At first, I hesitated, but something inside whispered, "Say yes." That afternoon, I stood before 50 children and told them about fear, failure, and faith. I told them how I failed over and over, but never gave up. When I finished, they clapped, not because I was a great speaker, but because I was real. One little boy came up to me and said, "Sir, I want to be brave like you." I didn't know how to react. I just knelt, smiled, and said, "You already are." Growth is painful, change is painful, but nothing is as painful as staying stuck somewhere you don't belong. The moment I stepped out of that school after my first ever motivational talk, something inside me was different. I felt alive, like I had discovered a part of myself that had always existed but had never been allowed to speak. For the first time in my life, I didn't just have a dream. I had a direction. I went home and made a vision board. Just pieces of old newspapers, handwritten notes, and cut-out quotes pasted on cardboard. It had no expensive graphics or fancy colors, but it had heart. At the top, I wrote, "I want to become a full-time motivational writer and speaker." It sounded crazy even to me. How could a poor man from a forgotten town with no degree and no contacts even dream of something like that? If your dreams don't scare you, they're not big enough. From that day on, my routine changed drastically. 4:30 a.m. Wake up. 6:30 a.m. Write blog posts, scripts, reflections. 7:00 a.m. 4:00 p.m. Factory work. 5:00 p.m. 6:30 p.m. Learn online. Public speaking, copywriting, digital skills. 7:00 p.m. 9:00 p.m. Read books and practice speeches in front of a mirror. Weekends were spent visiting schools, small events, or just recording motivational videos on my borrowed phone and uploading them to a YouTube channel I named Voice of the Broke Dreamer. The channel had no intro music, no editing, just raw talks. But it had something many channels didn't: truth. As things started getting better, life reminded me that it still had tests. The factory announced sudden layoffs. I was one of the people let go. Suddenly, my only source of income vanished. My first reaction was panic. My mother needed medicine, bills were due, there was no savings. But then I remembered a quote I'd written on my wall: "Comfort kills ambition, discomfort creates warriors." I had two options. 1, beg for another low-paying job. 2, take a leap of faith into the unknown. For the first time, I chose the second. I took the little money I had and printed flyers offering motivational talks, content writing, and online workshops for schools, tuition centers, and NGOs. I walked for hours each day handing out those flyers. Some people laughed. Some tore the paper in front of me. Some said, "You think people will pay to hear you talk?" But a few listened. A few said, "Let's try." And that's all I needed. My first paid workshop paid me Rs. 500, about the cost of a single meal in the city. It wasn't about the money. It was about value. For the first time, I earned money from my mind and not from my hands. I reinvested it. bought a tripod stand from a secondhand shop, upgraded my mic to a basic collar mic, created free ebooks with the title set for the middle-class hero. People started noticing. A few schools invited me again. My blog articles started being shared in Facebook groups. My YouTube videos, once with 10 views, now got 200, then 400, then 1,000. It wasn't viral growth, it was honest, organic, slow-burning fire, but success isn't a straight line. When I started charging a little more, some people called me a sellout. One person commented on my video, "You're trying too hard, you'll never be like real speakers." That one comment shattered my energy for days. I stopped recording. The fear of not being enough crept back in. But then I received a voice note on WhatsApp from a student I'd never met. "Sir Rihan, I was thinking about ending my life. Your video, You Matter Even If They Don't Say It, saved me. I cried all night and told my parents everything. Thank you." I cried too, and I whispered to myself, "Keep climbing." Months later, I was invited to speak at a youth development conference in Lahore. It wasn't paid, but it had 300+ attendees and big-name guests. It was my first time on such a stage. I wore my old, carefully ironed white shirt and blue jeans. No fancy suit, no stylist, just me and my story. When I stepped on stage, my legs shook, but my heart was steady. I spoke for 20 minutes. When I ended, there was silence for a moment, and then an eruption of applause. Some stood, some cried. One organizer hugged me and said, "You made them believe again." After the conference, I went back to my hometown for a few days. My mother, now healthier, watched my videos on a small phone screen with tears in her eyes. She held my hand and said, "Beta, your dreams fed you. Now they're feeding others." I looked around at our same old home. Nothing had changed, but I had. And because of that, everything was changing. True success is not about how high you climb, but how many hands you reach while rising. I had come a long way from sweeping factory floors. My YouTube channel now had over 20,000 subscribers, and I was giving motivational talks in colleges, schools, even corporate offices. My blogs were being translated into Urdu and Hindi. I had finally earned enough to move my mother into a small but well-kept home in the city. And meaning, I would soon learn, comes with a final test. One morning, I received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a handwritten letter from a boy in prison. His name was Azayan, 18 years old, convicted of robbery. He had found one of my podcasts on a smuggled radio and wrote, "Sir Rahan, I don't know if this letter will even reach you, but if it does, know this. I was going to end my life, but your words, they kept me breathing. You said, your past is a place of reference, not a place of residence. That line saved me." He ended with, "Will you ever speak to people like us?" That letter hit me like thunder. I thought about all the people no one speaks to. Prisoners, orphans, laborers, addicts, street kids. People labeled too broken for change. I realized that my success would mean nothing if I didn't reach those still stuck where I once was, so I did something many called foolish. I paused all paid speaking events. For the next year, I volunteered. Prisons, drug rehabilitation centers, rural schools, orphanages. I spoke with no camera, no crowd, no applause. Just souls who were forgotten by the world. And there, among the so-called failures, I found the deepest transformation of all. Months later, I was invited by a youth correctional center to conduct a week-long mindset workshop. To my surprise, Azayan was one of the attendees. He came up to me after the first session, hugged me, and cried, "Sir, I've been waiting to thank you in person." He had started reading, journaling, and had enrolled in a diploma program inside prison. The director of the center said, "That boy, he was once hopeless, now he teaches others." That day, I didn't feel proud. I felt grateful. Grateful that I hadn't given up on myself, because if I had, this boy might not be standing in front of me. A few years passed. My content began reaching people across Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, and the Middle East. I was invited to Dubai for a TEDx event. I shared my journey, not as someone who made it big, but as someone who started small and refused to stop. A famous host backstage said to me, "You're not a speaker, you're a movement." But I didn't feel like a movement. I still remembered the cold nights, the job rejections, the broken bench by the tracks, my mother's tired smile. I was just Rayhan, the man who changed his life by changing his mind. I launched a foundation called the Second Chance Project, aimed at helping people who feel stuck in life due to poverty, prison, or pain. We offered mindset training, free education, and mentoring. One of our earliest success stories was a woman who had been abandoned by her family. She went on to become a school principal in a rural village. One quiet evening, I stood before the mirror. The same mirror I once stared into with doubt and despair, but now I saw someone else. A man with calm in his eyes, wrinkles of laughter and lines of growth, a heart no longer desperate but devoted. I whispered to my reflection, "Thank you for not giving up." After years of pain, growth, learning, failing, and serving, I finally understood. It was never about changing the world. It was about changing me, and then offering that version of myself to the world. I had gone from a factory floor to global platforms, from hopelessness to hope giver, from silence to voice. But the real victory? I helped others do the same. The story teaches us that your life is not limited by your circumstances, but by your mindset. When you take responsibility for your thoughts, you gain power over your future. You don't need permission to begin, just decision.